Gracious God, thank you that you invite us to make our home in you. And we pray that as we listen and reflect this evening, we might think of what it means for houses to be homes and homes to form communities. So may this be a place of listening, of reflection, of discovery. In the name of Christ. Amen.
Amen. One of the pleasures for me about working on housing in the Diocese of Gloucester has been working with Chris Beales, Canon Chris Beales, who's been a member of the Archbishop's Commission on housing and has really helped network for us around the life of our diocese. And it's between Chris and Bishop Rachel that we have the first of our speakers. And Chris is just going to come to you for a moment to introduce Lord Gardiner, who we haven't got in person, but we do have for us as the first of our speakers. Chris, over to you. You need to unmute, Chris. You get the prize.
That's unmuted now, isn't it?
Yep.
Lord Gardiner was recommended to us by somebody I know in Homes England. I asked this person's advice and they said, Lord Gardiner, very committed to rural affairs and is the Minister for Rural Affairs in DEFRA, the Department of the Environment. And it turns out, and you're going to hear this shortly when he talks, that he is very committed to rural housing. And he made his maiden speech in the House of Lords actually on rural housing. So I don't want to give away the rest of what he's going to say, but and he gives a bit of an explanation of who he is, but I think he's got some really important points, and we will of course record these and circulate them afterwards, because when government makes statements, we need to call them to account. So I think I would say let's get on straight away with Lord Gardiner.
I very much appreciate this very kind invitation to speak as Minister for Rural Affairs at this conference on rural housing and the future of rural communities. Indeed, my maiden speech in the House of Lords in 2010 was on rural housing, having facilitated a rural housing scheme on the farm at Kimble in Buckinghamshire. And I know, therefore, how essential small-scale housing developments are, firstly for the residents, but also particularly, I feel, for the community as well. I would have very much liked to have been here with you in person, but of course the order of the day is to do these meetings and speeches via Zoom. But I very much look forward to a time when we will all be able to gather again, because obviously we gain so much from that mutual exchange with each other. But I do want to say that the government is committed to helping rural communities to flourish socially and economically, and indeed support the rural way of life in all the great richness and diversity that it has. We want to level up opportunities in the countryside. We want strong and stable economies in rural areas that work for everyone, supporting vibrant communities, prosperity, and well-being. Affordable housing is an essential element which underpins the vitality of rural communities, enabling young families to continue to live in their local areas and key workers to be based near to their places of work. Indeed, my concept of a flourishing rural community is a multi-generational one, and I've seen this very much myself in some of the rural housing schemes, where parts of the community of all generations can gather together. Against that background, Homes England's Affordable Homes programme has created over 25,000 affordable homes between 2011 and 2020 in settlements with a population of fewer than 3,000 people, with over £2 billion going to significantly rural local authorities. We recognise the vital importance of these smaller settlements for both economic and housing growth. Between April 2015 and March 2019, 11% of new build additional affordable homes have been delivered in villages with a population of fewer than 3,000. The government is continuing to invest in affordable housing, with over £12 billion available over 5 years, the largest investment in affordable housing in a decade. The new Affordable Homes Programme will provide up to 180,000 new homes across the country, should economic conditions allow, and includes an expectation that at least 10% of those homes will be in rural settlements. The planning system plays a key part in delivering affordable housing in rural areas. The Planning for the Future White Paper sets out the government's ambitions for significant changes to the focus and processes of planning to secure better outcomes, including improving our precious countryside and environment, alongside increasing the supply of land for new homes and sustainable places. The government is keen to see communities more involved in the planning process and has provided funding to encourage communities to engage in the planning process through the preparation of neighbourhood plans. These allow communities to shape, direct and help deliver sustainable development in their local area, outside of strategic policies, including the ability to identify and provide for local housing needs. I've always felt that design, with the local vernacular respected, is an asset to the village. And as I've seen in developments that I have been so fortunate to proverbially cut the ribbon on, how important that sense of place and design is. Those who live in rural areas want the same as those who live in our towns and cities: access to affordable housing, good quality public services, decent connectivity, good local schools and healthcare, and quality jobs. I think we should all be immensely proud of our countryside, our varied landscapes, indeed our national parks and coastal areas, and all our outstanding natural heritage, enjoyed by so many and among our greatest attractions and assets. Our work to support people who live and work in the countryside serves the national interest, the production of great quality food, a place where so many SMEs are resident, a countryside which is so important, particularly in the sense of physical and mental well-being. I think this last year has entrenched my views on the critical nature of community, looking out for each other and working together. There are always lessons to be learned, but there are some constants too. The voluntary spirit in every community, villages and parish councils, where we can push together forward sensitive small-scale developments in rural villages, which are surely so vital, not only now, but for the future. So I do wish this conference all success. I think the collaboration and the way forward always is to ensure that all parts of the community understand how important that rural housing is, that it is part of how we make sure a vital and vibrant future for rural communities. And I'm very grateful for this opportunity to speak, and I very much look forward to hearing from the Bishop how the conference has gone and indeed how we might work together in the future. Thank you. I very much
Catherine, thank you. Thank you so much. Really good to hear some of those things there around community, around engagement in the planning process, and the whole sense of the way in which the rural community works together. I'm sure that there will be things that you will be wanting to respond to in that from your own experience. And the good news is that there is space to do so a little bit later on in our conversation this evening. But I think that takes us really nicely to Paul Miner, who works for CPRE, the Council for Protection of Rural England. for a number of years, since 2002, and that whole question of land use and planning. It is always, when we start talking about planning and about rural development, we know that we are getting into an area that's not easy for us to know. How do we navigate our way around that, which both protects our rural countryside, but actually provides homes and proper and suitable and affordable homes for us to live. So building on what's been said there, Paul, we're absolutely delighted that you're with us this evening and look forward very much indeed to what you have to say.
Great. Thanks very much, Robert, and thanks also very much to Chris and Rowena for involving us in the event this evening. So it's something that we were very interested in, very keen to be involved with. Also got a colleague of mine, Lizzie Hearn, who's our specialist on rural housing, who's also joining us this evening, who's in the audience. And also pleased to see Patricia Broadfoot here as well, who's one of our national trustees, and who is also based in Gloucestershire itself. So yeah, just bear with me a second. Just got so I'm just going to share my screen quickly, just to make sure that you're all seeing the same thing as me. How does it?
It's on the presenter. There you go.
Yeah, so it should be coming up now, I think. So CPRE was formed in 1926, and we've long had an interest in the design quality of new housing. Just to say that we've gone through a couple of name changes over the years, and we now call ourselves CPRE, the Countryside Charity. And what we're also looking to do for our new 2020 to 2026 strategy is not just talk about the more traditional work we've done about protection of the countryside, but also to say how we want to see rural areas and rural communities develop in future. And there are a number of issues that rural communities face, as Lord Gardiner referred to in his speech, and also Robert has referred to in the introduction, that we also want to get more involved in addressing. And key amongst those issues is the worrying shortage of rural affordable housing, and looking to provide solutions to that and get more better designed but genuinely affordable homes provided in rural areas. And I've just set out here what our current strategic priorities are, but we were very pleased to see the Coming Home report. There was a lot of very important issues that the report raised, in particular the need to provide more genuinely affordable homes in rural areas, and also the need for the government's programme of planning changes to work in a way that would help that best happen. And with the system as we currently have, that there are a number of problems, but there are a number of valuable aspects of the current system that we're concerned that will be lost if the government pursues some of the changes as talked about in the white paper, and I will go on to talk about those. And from our perspective, we know the government has a commitment to building 300,000 houses a year, and we support that commitment. But if we're going to do it in the kind of fashion that Lord Gardiner was talking about, then recent practice in the planning system needs to improve dramatically. The number of big concerns about the kind of development that's taken place. And on this slide here, I've shown a good and a bad example, really. The top example, it might look to some of you as though it's in the Cotswolds, but actually it's in a place called Hinton Charterhouse, which is to the south of Bath, which is in the Cotswolds over at St Natural Beauty. But for me, it's not really the Cotswolds, to be honest, but it is in the A1B. But the housing scheme that was built there, led by the parish council, was a really good example of what can happen in rural areas when it's done well. It's led by the parish council, provides homes for people on the local housing register in need and who wanted to stay in the area, and it won a design award from the Royal Institution of British Architects. And it's well in keeping with the building vernacular of villages in the Bath area. But too often what we've actually seen in practice has been more like Sherford in the South Hams near Plymouth, which was a new town that was designed with a number of very noble intentions and with a very strong master plan that had been agreed between the developers, the Prince's Foundation, and also Plymouth and South Hams councils. But what happened was that a few years ago, the developers of the South Hams part of the site, which is most of the new town, they were able to persuade South Hams District Council to water down and lose many important parts of the design code for Sherford on grounds of viability and profit. And when these kind of things happen, it does shake people's faith in the planning system quite considerably. And it's perhaps no wonder that new housing development so often attracts very vociferous opposition in local communities when people have been involved in shaping a design code, have been looking to get it in line with local character, and yet these promises have been reneged on further down the line. And we did a major piece of research with University College London, which was published just over a year ago, which showed that this is actually a national problem. And Sherford wasn't actually an isolated example. And also, the problem is a particularly acute one in rural areas. So this is a housing design audit for England. It's available on our website. And although it showed marginal improvements in design quality over an earlier design audit done by the Commission for Architecture and the Built Environment in 2005, it also showed that in the vast majority of cases, we were seeing mediocre and poor quality new development. And it also gets worse the further away you get from London. And we looked at a number of schemes in the southwest, none specifically in Gloucestershire, but a number in and around Bristol in particular. And we'll make these slides available, but again, what it shows was that in the southwest region, as in the rest of England, good quality development was the exception, and too often we were seeing mediocre or poor quality development. And so the current system is far from perfect. It needs to improve in a number of ways. And Lord Gardiner set out in his speech the priorities that the government have for changing the planning system. But the planning white paper was a very outline vague document, and there's still a lot of questions as to what the government will actually do to take forward the changes in practice. And so CPRE has worked with a wide range of other environmental, housing and planning NGOs to produce a joint vision for planning. And there are a number of core themes to this vision for planning. You can read the full vision document on our website, and the slide shows the core themes of the vision. So I just wanted for the rest of this talk just to flesh out some of the key themes. So in particular, we think it's important that you still have a local democratic element in the system. One of the key strengths of our current system is that the vast majority of planning decisions are made locally and made by local councils in line with local policies that are decided through the input of their communities. Again, it's not always perfect. There are definite room for improvement. Too many local authorities don't have an up-to-date plan in place, and often the local plans that we do see are often far too long and very difficult to navigate. So there are a lot of beneficial changes that can be made. But I think what the example of Sherford that I showed earlier makes crystal clear is that if we are going to build 300,000 houses a year, and we're going to do it in such a sensitive environment as the English countryside and our towns and cities, then we need to make sure that developers and local councils are accountable for the development they allow, and that the development they allow meets local priorities, meets local needs for affordable housing, and also makes good on promises to design in keeping with local vernacular and provide community facilities. And we're concerned that the white paper as proposed, will only allow one stage of public involvement at the local plan making stage and won't provide sufficient guarantees of public involvement at the all-important project stage, when things like the detailed design and layout of new developments and community benefits such as planning agreements are signed. And and the government's putting much more emphasis on local design codes, but it's not clear as to whether these will be legally binding or not. And as we saw with Sherford, these haven't been up until now. And this is a concern that's been raised by a wide variety of organisations. And we were particularly pleased to see that in the Coming Home report that there was particular interest shown by ideas that have been worked together by a consultant called Gail Mayhew and also a colleague called Charlie Dugdale about a new stewardship approach to new development, where the landowner is involved in stewarding the development for its whole life. There are other means of guaranteeing design quality, but we think that the ideas that are being put forward there, in which the Coming Home reports airs, are a very important contribution to the debate and should be looked at further. The second area that I want to say a few things about are on provision of generally affordable housing. And again, we were concerned with the white paper that it's actually going to make the provision of affordable housing more difficult in many rural areas. So lifting the threshold for seeking affordable housing on schemes from the current average of about 5 to 10 units to more than 40 or 50 units. But too often, again, as with design quality, we've seen developers being able to negotiate away planning policies looking for a percentage of affordable housing on grounds of viability and profit. And this has to change. And one of the most cogent agendas for change was put forward by Sir Oliver Letwin in his independent review of Build Out in 2018. And again, I'd strongly suggest that having a look at that report, because it recommended empowering local authorities to be able to master plan sites and be able to set policies determining the mix of homes to be provided on new schemes well in advance. And this is urgently needed in many rural areas where we find that 90% of key workers are priced out of their communities due to the lack of affordable housing. 9 out of 10 rural areas are currently affordable for many essential rural workers. And if we ever take a stronger approach towards affordable housing, it will have economic benefits for rural areas, because if we build a development of 10 affordable homes, for example, we could actually help boost the rural economy by over £1 million, support dozens of new jobs, and actually create more government revenue through taxation. So it's got a wide range of benefits if we can actually do more to provide the affordable homes people need. And finally, I also want to say that 1 or 2 points about the more, what you perhaps see as the more traditional CPRE area of protecting and enhancing countryside and green spaces. We're concerned that the move towards a very simple zoning system that's talked about in the white paper won't actually strengthen protection for our most important countryside and may weaken it in many cases. And we've seen too often in recent years, for example, in areas like stunning natural beauty like the Cotswolds, that significant increases in the amount of development that's been allowed in rural villages in the Cotswolds, but too often, again, as we've seen, it's often 4 and 5 bedroom executive homes, isn't meeting local needs, and whereas perhaps in the Cotswolds it might be relatively well designed, it's still questions as to whether it's actually meeting the very urgent needs of key workers and other people, local people who want to stay in the area. And also we want to see more powers for neighbourhood planning bodies as well to designate areas of local green space. And in addition to the work we're doing in the vision, and we'll continue to engage in the government's planning changes as they come forward. So currently we're going to respond to the draft National Planning Policy Framework that's out for consultation now. We'll also look to get involved in any planning bills that come forward towards the end of this year. But also through our network of local groups, including in Gloucestershire and other English counties, we'll continue to work through the planning system at the local level. But also, there's a number of things that local people can do to get involved in the system as well. It will be more important than ever to get involved in local plans in the future, especially if some of the changes proposed by the government go ahead. But also as well, neighbourhood planning is a really good way of getting more locally distinctive and sensitive development in villages, and a number of neighbourhoods across England have already taken advantage of neighbourhood planning powers. We produced a guide which is pictured and which is also available on our website about how you can get involved in neighbourhood planning. but neighbourhood plans can be used to designate affordable housing in plans, also to set out their design. It's good to see someone here, I think, from English Rural tonight. There's a number of rural specialist housing associations that can also provide advice, and also rural housing enablers such as Louise Williams, who's here tonight as well. And also local CPRE groups such as CPRE Gloucestershire are always keen to promote good practice through the award schemes they run. So there's a number of things that local people can do to shape a better future for their communities through the planning system. But alongside that, at the national level, CPRE will continue to work for a planning system that's locally democratic, but also does more to provide the affordable homes that we need, while making sure that we protect and enhance our precious countryside for future generations. Thank you very much.
Paul, thank you so much for that. Great riches, I think, in there for us, both challenges about what's happening and about how we can be involved. And I particularly liked, you talked early on about accountability. I was listening to what you were saying, just reflecting on how accountability runs all the way through this, and for the different parties involved, how we're how developers accountable, how is the planning system accountable, how we're accountable as individuals and as the church. And that may be good for some questions that we might want to reflect on later within that. And just you've talked to us about democratic input and affordability. We keep on coming to that, and the protection of the environment. Right, so thank you so much indeed for that. We're going to come to Rowena King now. Rowena is the rector of Bourton-on-the-Water with Clapton and the Rissingtons, one of our rural multi-parish benefices. Bourton as oh, I don't know, Rowena, you'll tell me, is it a village or a town? I think it's probably a village.
Oh, it's a village.
Definitely a village. Get upset if I call
Definitely
it.
Definitely a village. A large village, but a village.
And then some villages around, but I'm just thinking that you might come and talk to us this evening, aware also of the development that's taking place for you, and it'd be really good to hear some reflections from you, from the perspective of being an incumbent of a rural benefice and your engagement with the communities there. So Rowena, thank you so much for being willing to do this, and we look forward to what you have to say to us.
Thank you, Bishop Robert. And it was interesting in reflecting on this topic and thinking, actually, what types of questions does our faith, or does rural housing ask of our faith, and how does our faith also speak into this issue, and how does that work out in practice? And I think this is a huge area, particularly for people in ministry. And the passage I kept coming back to was that sense of the word became flesh and dwelt among us. And I think for me, at the heart of my ministry in rural areas is that idea of dwelling. And dwelling is so much more than a bricks and mortar building. It's about a community, it's about relationship, it's about connections and networks. And all of these things, I think, come into play as we're wrestling with this issue. I love the fact, actually, that the word dwelling in that context was also came and camped among us, set up a tent. And so our God is a God who comes and sets up a tent among us. And I think for me, that notion of God not being distant, but the nature of God to be relational and communal is at the heart of all our work, whether that's in the parish or whether that's wider in the church, looking at developments or supporting planning processes. And so I think for me, that relational heart has to come through in all that we do. And it was great listening to Paul, because I think all of the things that he was talking about had that relation and connection at the centre. So whether that was the idea of local democracy and making sure people are involved in decision making, that there are relationships developed between local people, local councils, the communities and the developers, and taking the time to engage in those processes, both for us in living in villages and working in ministry, but also in the processes that we try and shape at local and national levels in our processes. I think also that sense of affordability hits me very closely. I don't know about other people in ministry, but I'm finding more and more conversations with people who are priced out of their social housing or are priced out of their village. And we know that splinters the networks of relationships that we long to develop. So when families can't stay locally but have to move further afield, away from relatives, especially with social housing. I was recently talking with a family who were unable to move closer to their family and their support structures because of the system in which they were involved. And so I think many of us are dealing with that on a daily basis, and wrestling with the consequences of unaffordable housing on the ground. And I think also that sense of connection and relationship and place to do with stewardship of creation and green spaces and local communities, it's certainly very live in our community. It's something people, I think, have always been passionate about, but the last year in particular has made people more passionate about their connection to place. And that's something that rural communities have very strongly anyway, that sense of location, locality, connection, and wanting to protect and steward that in the way that we use that land. And so I think these issues of relationship, of justice, of diversity, of accountability, of stewardship, lie both at the heart of our faith and also at the heart of how we would approach engaging with issues of housing. The downside of that is that we know relationships are messy. Relationships take time. There are certain challenges that arise when we place relationship at the heart of housing and the way we engage with that. And I think some of those are worth acknowledging, acknowledging that relationships are hard work, that it's not something that simply comes, that we have to invest time, attention, listening, all of those things in making those connections, and that's really important. And one of the challenges is that particularly in housing issues, we end up with a conflict, therefore, of outcome over process. We have people who are solely focused on the outcomes, whether that's profit margins, etc. And so building processes that require conversation are key. And I think Paul was talking about some very practical and useful ways in which his organisation and other organisations are working towards that, to make sure that relationships are built and that trust and accountability are at the heart of those relationships in moving forward. And I think one of the reasons it's challenging is because actually relationships are challenging when the different parties hold different values. And so a conversation about the values of housing is absolutely essential. And I think that is upwelling in different organisations, particularly the church's recent work on the values around housing, and that sense that when we're talking, we can be on the same page about what we're looking for, that relationship is at the heart, that community is at the heart, that we are looking beyond a physical building. So safe, stable, sustainable, sociable, and secure. And so I think in ministry, we hold those values, and it's important for each of us to find different ways to engage in those conversations about housing at different levels, and to begin creating a common language, a common set of values, and always holding at the heart the sense of the God who dwells among us, and holding therefore our community and our relationships as sacred and central. Thank you.
Rowena, thank you so much for those reflections and for where you landed us in that with relationships at the heart. On one of my, I was some of you heard me say this before, but I was asked on one occasion why the church was interested in the question of housing, and my response to that is that actually in this country, as the church, we've been engaged in building communities since the year 597. It's actually at the heart of what we are about, because of our belief in the God who comes and pitches his tent among us, pitches his tent in the soil of our communities, and makes a home here among us. One of the great things about these evenings is that it does bring together such a great and diverse group of people, and because we can meet on Zoom these days, it brings together a group of people not just from Gloucestershire but from other parts of our country as well. It brings together those who are engaged as members of communities, those in the planning process, in particular interest groups, in developments. And so conversation is a really important part of that, conversation that informs us, that allows to understand. And that's what we're going to spend 20 minutes or so doing now. And I wonder, as we go into our breakout groups for 20 minutes, it would be good to reflect perhaps first on the question of what struck us from today. Is there a common theme or something that's particularly taken us from today as we've been thinking about rural housing and how to ensure good, affordable, sustainable rural housing and development? And then if we go from what struck us, one of the things, building on the report, the report on housing coming home that's just been issued, is that I like the fact that at the end of it there are recommendations. There are recommendations for the church, there are recommendations for government. So I think from this, as we've listened to what we've heard today, what do we want to say? What do we want to say to government, to the planning process, I guess? What do we want to say to our communities as we reflect on the challenge of new housing among us? I think that's one of the things that we have to recognise. So often proposals for new housing are frankly deeply unpopular. So how do we respond to that? What do we need to say to ourselves, and what do we need to say to the church as well? So to the planners, to our communities, to ourselves, and to the church, what we want to say, given what we've learned today. Really good to see people using the chat, and there are things there that I am definitely going to come back to when we start having our plenary session after this. But Catherine, if you'd like to put us into groups, and we're there for just under 20 minutes, I think. So we should be back all together by about, if I've got my timing right, about 7:05 for 25 minutes of discussion before summary. And for those of you who've been in these sessions that I've held together before, the one thing you'll know is that we do finish on time. So if you're feeling hungry, you won't be late for your tea at the end of this, I'm pleased to say. Catherine, let's go to our groups and let's try and pick up some points. This is really just about bouncing ideas off each other, seeing what it is we've learned from this, what we're going to take away and to use. Though I wondered, I've not told him this, whether I might kick off by asking Chris Beals. Chris, would you while we're waiting for other people to come and to put comments into the chat, just reflect for a moment on what you've heard today.
Well, first of all, you can hear me, can't you?
Yes.
It's been very fascinating. I thought Lord Gardiner was very positive. He talked about levelling up. He certainly talked about the value of good rural housing and community building. He mentioned intergenerational, which I think is a very important aspect. And so I think we have much to go back to him about, which I felt was very positive. And he gave us some substantial figures. I jotted them down, and we'll make sure they're in the notes or whatever after this. And then what Paul said, I thought was absolutely fascinating. I came across Paul because I took part in that Vision for Planning program that he referred to. And I was impressed with what he said then, which is how he came to be invited now. And what I liked about him, many things, but one in particular was his emphasis on getting people to participate, and the fact that the CPRE has its neighbourhood planning resource, which we can draw on. I think that could be a really significant way forward. I thought what Rowena did was to sum up brilliantly the really key issue of relationships. And because the Christian faith is rooted in a God who takes relationships very seriously, the church has a calling also to take relationships seriously, just as everybody does. So I quite often say the Church of England is the national church. We're here to serve the whole nation and not just our congregations. Sometimes we need to remind ourselves of that, but please, everybody else reminds us of that too. We are here for everybody. And as it happens, we have a couple of 100,000 acres of land across England, some of which may well be suitable for housing, and some of which could also be suitable for affordable housing, which was one of the points made in our group just now. So this opportunity to positively engage with the planning process, with the planners, with the developers, with the housing associations, build relationships, get to know people, and link with local communities seems to be a particular role that we should be playing.
Chris, thank you enormously. And I really do want to encourage those of you on the call, just if there are things that struck you from the groups that you've been in or from the conversation, do put those into the chat. Ian, you have been brave enough to do so. Ian Gillespie, it'd be really helpful just to hear from you for a moment. Please unmute yourself and speak to us. Thank you.
Yes, that's fine. Yes, no, we had quite a lively group, and we were in full flow when the 10 seconds came up. But basically, yes, we're acknowledging that it is the communication with the local communities where housing is required, and making sure that engaging with them, giving the knowledge of what is coming forward, remove a lot of the uncertainty. And obviously uncertainty will always bring forward objection. We also looked at neighbourhood plans, how the church could perhaps get involved with neighbourhood plans because of their land take would enable them with a dynastic sort of land availability to be able to spend time and prepare land to go into local authority SLARs, their strategic land research, and also to talk with parishes and look at their own neighbourhood plans and see where development would be best sited within their neighbourhood. And that the church's digital mapping system, you know, will be a big help there in looking at that sort of strategic planning.
Ian, thank you. I'm really grateful what you're picking up there about knowledge and understanding, and for making for good conversations. And it does seem to me, as I've looked at the whole challenge of housing, one of our difficulties is about actually how we have open and honest conversations and recognise that there is good development and there's poor development as well. And really good to hear about that today. Good development and poor development. And and then how we have a conversation, recognise we do need homes. Patricia, I'm really glad to see that you've made a comment there, and you made a comment earlier, I know, about second housing as well. Patricia, really great that you're part of this conversation. Just share some of that with us would be great.
Yes, well, they're two completely different points. The one I've just put in is about my concept that I use the term social sustainability, which is different obviously from environmental sustainability, but it does seem to me, as somebody who lives in a village with all the organisations that exist in that village, that having community is not just a pleasant thing, it's actually a thing that enables people to live fruitful, good lives, and people support each other, which in the end saves on government services. And I think that my rather crude notion was much better expressed by the Archbishop's report. And in our group, we certainly talked about our enthusiasm for the Archbishop's report coming home. And I'm really hopeful that good will come out of that. But I mentioned second homes in my comment before our discussions because I was actually giving a lecture to some people in Cirencester last week, and I didn't expect it, but all the concerns that came back afterwards were about the impact of second homes across the Cotswolds and what that was doing to the availability of housing. I thought we ought to throw that into the mix because in many of our villages in the Cotswolds and other parts of Gloucestershire, the fact that their community infrastructure is being eroded by the fact that people don't live there, they just visit occasionally. And so that's another, I don't know what you do about it, but it's certainly a factor in what we want to achieve, which is not only more affordable homes, more rural affordable homes, but actually sustainable communities.
Patricia, thank you. And I mean, I think that connects so well with, as you say, with coming home and the safe, stable, sustainable, sociable, satisfying housing. And for me, that mantra, which again you've heard me use before, about how it's houses that become homes and homes that are built together in community, and that does indeed ask those questions around second homes and holiday homes as well. And I guess a balance with that within the economy. No one thing is of itself necessarily wrong, but it's how that balance that nonetheless makes community. Benjamin, it would be really good. Let me call upon you.
Yes, I thought we had a very good discussion in our group where people with greater expertise than me were describing how so much of what is known to be good housing, good development, is compromised within the planning process by when used a term, by the viability argument that developers will deploy to say, well, we would like to build that, but we can't build that. And I think that does come to the way in which, where are the values within the planning system? And currently the financial bias of value towards the landowner is arguably distortive and excessive. So much of what we'd want to do, what we know should be done, is undermined because the planning system values the land as the start point and everything else slots into place behind that. And I think that's a good challenge to us as the church, if we're serious about this, is how do we place value on the land and how we make that available for development. And that's a sacrificial question, as the report coming home says, is the church needs to be sacrificial within this because the money from that land goes to fund ministry. So actually we're going to have to give up something on ministry in order to be able to allow more of this to happen. But that's a good challenge. And I think in practically working it through, it's really interesting. We have been able to deliver affordable housing schemes on church land. Actually, in all those questions, we've come up with a discussion about what is a fair price for the land at the start. And it's been about fair price to enable the development to happen, not about a competitive tender for best value in financial terms. And I think, again, that's something that comes out in the report. What does best value mean? And that's a question which I know, Robert, you could speak more eloquently than me on, best value is not most money. And I think in this diocese, we understand that. We need to make sure that we as a church own that more wholly, and that we articulate that to other landowners as well.
And that certainly is one of the challenges around in development. It's one of the challenges around in charity law as well. And I know, Benjamin, you've been really grateful for your engagement with that question with a number of bodies around the place. Alison, you commented on the question of social return on investment. It would be really nice if you said something slightly more about that.
Yes, I mean, there's evidence all the time demonstrating that by providing even as little as 8 or 10 affordable homes in a small rural community, that the benefit that this can bring to sustain the future of that community can be tenfold. Not only the income to the government, which is always very important when talking to the Treasury, that people being employed and providing jobs, building the homes can bring, but also, as I said in my answer, the social return on investment. You know, we English Rural have many developments, normally only 8 or 10 in size, but the people living there have a local connection. They want to be in their village and stay there, and so therefore they want to put something back into the village. And so, you know, many of our residents are on parish councils, working in the local shop, being a nursery school teacher, and providing and becoming part of the community. And that's what I think it's really it is all about. When we have the day the residents move into one of our developments, it's fantastic because they all know one another. They either grew up together, they're coming back, they've got family there looking to give or receive support from. And already you can see these new houses have got a community within the rural community growing. And the strength of those family and neighbour and friend support network, you know, particularly in this pandemic, has just been demonstrated so much. So I do think it's important that, you know, we look at the social benefit that rural affordable housing can bring to communities.
Alison, thank you. And it brings us back to that principle of relationship, and in the sense that in the end, I suspect all of us ultimately want to live in relationship with others, relationship with our neighbours, and that important sense that we don't see housing simply in isolation. Really grateful for that kind of wider reflection on what investment is in housing. Rob, Rebecca, let me come back to you, but Rob, let me just come back to you. Rob Garnham, be really good to hear about land value capture.
I think the Town and Country Planning Association, their phrase, land value capture for the benefit of the community, is about investing in the long term and expecting a return on that investment over a much longer period. Could be 100 years, it could be 50 years, the lifetime of the build and the new community that is built there, rather than getting all the money together, giving it to the local farmer or farmers, who then takes that money, quite rightly, it's his, and disappears on his yacht, and that value is taken out of the land on day one. So it's about capturing the value of the land over a much longer period of time. So any cash and investment that is released up front can go into community facilities. It can go into a village hall and a school at the start of the development, rather than towards the end, when we get those unfortunate arguments about viability. And I just mentioned the points about community. I chaired the scrutiny inquiry into the Gloucestershire emergencies of 2007, the floods and water shortages we had. And I was amazed at the strength within communities and their ability to look after themselves, not only during the emergencies, but for a long time afterwards, and how they plan for future emergencies. So I think that ability is out there within communities. We just need to tap into it.
And I think that communities are amazing places, and we've seen some of that in the last year. And I think that kind of long-term value is really important. I was being asked on Sunday about the Coming Home report, and was it the church flogging off land? And actually, I think one of the problems is for too long, landowners have been engaged in flogging off land, and this has to be about a long-term commitment and investment, which, as you say, arguably brings a better return in itself over time. I want to come to Rebecca and then to Prue. Rebecca Warren, unmute yourself and talk to us, and then Prue, can I come to you after that?
Thank you, Bishop Robert. So thank you. Yeah, I work for a house builder, so please be gentle with me. But those of you in the church also know that I'm heavily involved in the church as well. Thacum, who I work for, are quite a different house builder. We're not just building houses, we're building communities, and I mean that genuinely. So for all the things that Patricia and other people have commented on resonate particularly well with us. So we work with the Plunket Foundation, which is a charity that's been going for over 100 years, and many of you might be aware of them. They often come in when a community facility like a shop or a post office is failing, and there's been a number of instances where they've helped the local community acquire and run those facilities for themselves. We work with Plunket. Instead of waiting for a failing situation, we actually work with them with our developments and bring them alongside us. And we will build community facilities and then gift them to the community, which is quite an unusual situation. And we put in place support from Plunket to allow the community to run them. And the reason why we think this is really important is coming back to what Patricia was saying, is that actually for people's health and mental well-being, community has been really important. There's lots of studies about people across all diverse places, towns, cities and villages as well. And having that community, particularly during COVID, has been absolutely critical. So we see a situation where you have to get multi-generational input. And so with community facilities, you can have maybe somebody who's semi-retired or retired, just volunteering, for a few hours a week in the local shop, which is community run. And you might have a 16-year-old, it's their first opportunity to get out there into the world, and they might get paid a small amount for going to do that. And you have that interaction of multi-generational. And I think that's really important. I live in a village, and I was particularly young when I joined my village. I'm not so young anymore, but I was quite unusual. And age and connectivity and facilities are important for all ages. And affordability, which is something that's been particularly mentioned by a number of people before and after the breakouts. The only way we're going to get truly affordable houses is not just affordable housing, as in, affordable housing and policy compliant, is to increase the amount of supply in some areas, because otherwise you're just basically pushing up the price of houses because it can only be afforded by a few. So we have to have a range of type of houses for tenures for people who can afford or people who can't, in terms of shared ownership, affordable rent, social rent, whatever that might be. And that way you get a diverse community that can truly sustain itself and be resilient, rather than just have a particular type of generation or affordable category in a village. So I'd suggest for any of you who are interested is having a look at Plunket, because they would be somebody particularly worthwhile engaging with. And we would be more than happy, one of my colleagues is on the call as well, to talk to anybody about what we're doing and how we're doing it very differently as well.
Rebecca, thank you. Really good just to put that link or where to go to into the chat. As you know, in terms of we need house builders. I mean, the reality is, if we look at the walls that are sitting around us who are on this Zoom call, someone built that house once. We need house builders. And one of for me, the important things about these sessions we've been doing is that all the different people who are the different organizations, bodies that are part of creating houses and homes and communities come and have that conversation together, and there's a common agenda between us, which is much more than making money, which is about the communities that we build. Prue, really good to hear from you. And then Paul. Paul, no, I'm going to come back to you and to Rowena for a last couple of comments. But Prue, you're on mute. Oh,
right.
Brilliant, lovely.
I'm part of CPRE Gloucestershire, and I look after the Berkeley Vale bit of Gloucestershire, where we've got a huge developments proposed. They haven't been agreed yet, but 3, if not 4, going down the Vale between Gloucester and Bristol. And we've got one which is about 1/3 built outside Stonehouse. And the village school and the community shop or shopping facility never gets put in near the beginning of the process. So that there you are in surrounded by brand new houses with you know, not knowing your neighbours, and you haven't got granny down the road. And you've got to go miles to take the child to school. So you get to know people who are miles away because it's your child's primary school. And it would be so much better if the schools and possibly a small shop could go up at near the beginning of the development. And it would seem to me an opportunity for the schools to become church primary schools, because I think that that brings a lot more to the community and the children who attend. At the beginning. And I don't know whether you have influence with developers or planners or whatever, or whether we all shout about it, but otherwise we're going to grow up with a huge patch of people who don't have a church around the corner, and there they are, you know, not knowing who their neighbour is and nowhere to meet and nowhere to nothing.
Thank you, Prue. I think it's absolutely true, that sense about actually how we develop community facilities alongside developments as they come along, and finding the right place for that. My experience tells me that finding the right place to land is always a bit of a challenge within that, because developments come at quite different different rates. But certainly it's something that the church, in terms of helping shape and form community through schools and through our network of parishes and building communities, is absolutely there for, and is and taxes our minds. So thank you for that. Paul, let me come back to you. Is there anything that you just want to reflect on as we come to the end of our conversation?
Thanks very much, Robert. Yes, that was a really good discussion. I enjoyed participating in the breakout group as well, and I think what struck me about what was coming out of the conversations was that people were very concerned about the kind of housing that was being built in the area, and also, as Prue mentioned towards the end, whether the community facilities that people need are actually being provided with housing developments as well, whether we're just building dormitories as opposed to genuine communities. And I think also Rebecca provided that house builder perspective as well. And I think one of the things that I think I'm keen that we look to do, and which I think the church has made a really good start on with the Coming Home report, is that I think we need to reach some kind of consensus as to how you can make the planning system work better. And it may involve, and I think it's probably going to involve a number of different mechanisms in different areas. I think, for example, in areas where the church wants to do good things with its land, I think the stewardship model will be good. I think in some areas you might need to use the mechanisms that Sir Oliver Letwin recommended, and in other areas you might have local authorities building more houses themselves. But I think there's a clear consensus that yes, we do need to build much more new housing. Some of it might be in greenfield locations that CPRE wouldn't necessarily want to see built, and there will be sacrifices, but we do need to significantly improve the quality and type of housing that we're building from what we've seen over the past 10 to 15 years.
Thank you. Rowena, let me come to you. But Paul, thank you so much. Rowena, anything you want to reflect with us?
Yes, I think to end with, I just thought I would share a very practical experience which seems to draw together a lot of the themes which have been coming out of tonight, and it's comparing two developments of 5 houses, so 2 very small developments. One is just across from me now, and it's what's called the Old Library Mews. So there were 5, I think, 2-bedroom homes built, so you know, much smaller than many of the other homes built in Bourton, and yet only one of those is lived in, and the other 4 have become Airbnbs. So what could have been an addition to the community is now contributing, I guess, in a different way to the tourism destination that we are. And yet I'd like to contrast that with another 5 houses built in another home in which I lived on the Isle of Iona. So another very popular tourist destination, housing prices are very high. And yet a small community group got together and planned a series of affordable houses, particularly to keep young families on the island who couldn't come on. And so the island itself was no longer that social communal place. It was missing a whole generation. And it took them a very long time. I'm not saying it was an easy process. However, they put in place the safeguards which mean that the people who come to live there are contributing to the island. They're there full time. They are building and strengthening those community bonds, and it's reshaped that village community in a really positive way. And so we've got this contrast, but we also need to hold on to the fact that with committed communities of people working together for good development, that it is achievable even in the most difficult of places. You know, they had archaeological digs, they have, you know, land there is very, you know, precious. So it is possible, and it can be done with thought and consideration and with relationship and community at its heart.
Rowena, thank you. Really good place to land. Catherine's pointed out to me, IK, you've
Sorry,
got
that's me.
your hand up, and I haven't
Ishmael.
called, and I want you to feel left out. So so let me come to you.
Yeah, so my name's Ishmael. Just a comment. I think we talked about communities and growth of communities.
Yeah.
And I think we're missing one of the points that what we notice over pandemics and floods is we become communities of crisis when we come together at times of crises, rather than proactive communities on daily lives. And I think, how do we flip that the other way around, rather than waiting for a pandemic or a disaster or something to bring us together? What is it that stops us from coming together on a daily life? And how can we engage with the next generation of the population to come to these villages? Example, the young people. I think that's one of the things. How do we start facilitating and engaging with the next generation? In our Zoom room, we had comments, we need generation from the people of that village to take over the village. But I think we're missing the generation if we're not including them in those conversations in the first place.
Ishmael, thank you. Absolutely right point in that sense, not just for a crisis, but actually for it's how we live. And all of this is how we live well and across our generations. It's been a really good conversation. Chris, I don't know about you. I think one of the great strengths of these conversations is it just informs us, it enlivens us, and it enlivens our participation in the whole debate around housing. So that allows us to take part and hopefully to influence and to guide what happens. Chris, is there any last thing you want to say? And then I'm going to highlight what happens in May, and then it will be time to go.
I'd just like to say thank you. I mean, such a rich conversation, and so fascinating that so many different things have come up. Some of them extremely difficult to address, but I'm so excited about actually involving not only communities, but also developers and also housing associations, and also, you know, activists and people, you know, offering, like the CPRE are, that training in neighbourhood planning. I think it's something that we should be looking to mobilise people so that there really can be some proactive work going on.
Chris, thank you. I agree with you. I think it's been a really, really good conversation. And this is about our futures. This is about how we live as individuals and in community. And that's why these conversations are so important. Let me do the advert now. The advert is for the next of these. It's a little bit of a way away. We're going to try and do 3 of these through the year. This is the first. Our next one is on the 20th of May at 6 o'clock, same time, same format, will take us through to 7:40. Though we might do something which is more conversational than presentations with it. And it's going to be all around coming home, the report that's just been sent out this week. The report of the Archbishop's Commission on Housing, Church and Community. I'm really pleased, Chris, that you have arranged for Bishop Gooley, who is going to be the chair of the implementation group, for that to be with us. Bishop Gooley and I know each other very well indeed, and she is soon to be Bishop of Chelmsford, but she's also going to be the lead bishop for the Church of England in terms of housing. I'm really pleased to be working with her on that, working with Chris and with Ben as well as part of the executive for that. With Bishop Gooley is going to be David Orr from the National Housing Federation. I've got that right, Chris? You can correct me if I've got that wrong. You're on mute, busy.
Retired chief exec. But a member of the Housing Commission.
I think it should be a really good evening indeed. I do encourage you to go and look for the Coming Home report. You've got the link there from Chris. There's the full report, or there's the slightly more accessible executive summary to have a look at. And unlike so many Church of England reports, this one is written in a language I can understand. And I can't tell you what a relief that is for me, because I read quite a lot of reports and I think, what are they talking about? But this one, I think, oh, I understand what that's talking about. So I encourage you to that. But can I say to all of you, thank you for being part of this. Thank you for your participation in what's been a really great conversation today. And I wish you a good night. But thank you. And thank you particularly, I should say, to our speakers, of course, as well, for all that you've had to give us. We do really appreciate your giving your time. Paul and Rowena and Chris for keeping us all in order. Thank you and good night.